Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for nearly 12 years now, and I lead our work looking at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with 110,000 qualified members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle through land, planning and development, construction, valuation, brokerage, property, finance and building management, and indeed end of life, and also across all the different asset types of land itself, residential, commercial, alternative and infrastructure. Clearly a very broad canvas upon which data and technology is bringing huge benefits, but also potentially some things we need to think about from a kind of risk management perspective. And I'm really glad to have Alistair join me from Mongoose Cyber Security. So please do join me on the discussion, Alistair.
Hello, Andrew. Nice to be here.
Hi, Alistair. Great to have you on the call. Now, before we get into the bits and bytes, I always like to dare I say, introduce hopefully the human element, and it'd be great to hear a bit about your backstory and the origin story of Mongoose.
Oh yeah, with pleasure, Andrew. Firstly, I suppose thank you for having us on. So I'll start with myself. So my name's Alistair, and I am the founder and MD, as it were, of Mongoose Cyber Security. I often get asked about the name Mongoose Cyber Security and where does that name come from. So to understand where that name comes from, we need to go back slightly into my past to sort of figure out where it comes from. So in my early career, I was a Royal Marine, and I specialised in radio communications and signalling, which is where I sort of found my love of networking and working with computers. I did multiple tours of Afghanistan, but for my final tour, our call sign at my patrol base was Mongoose, or Mongoose 70 to be more specific, because that's how British military call signs work. You have like a designator and then a number, and they mean different things than who you are. But as a whole, Mongoose 70 was a call sign of the patrol base, and me being the signaller, I was always on the radio, and so people were always trying to raise me, hello Mongoose 70, trying to get hold of you, we want to see what's going on. So when I came to name the business, I found it really hard, because a lot of tech businesses I find have kind of uninspiring names, and they're sort of a little bit like, I suppose, like a 1960s office block style name is sort of how I describe them. So I tried to think outside the box, and I thought of Mongoose, and then as I started to actually look into what a mongoose was, and they're like a little rodent carnivore, and I started to realize how they act and what they do. I thought this actually works really well for what we do. So by their nature, a mongoose is a highly aggressive highly aggressive, highly intelligent little rodent, and they're most famous for killing snakes. So as I understand it, when they see a king cobra, they just cannot help themselves. They will go out of their way to kill the cobra. And in the process, if they do get bitten by one of the most venomous snakes in the world, they're okay. They essentially just sleep it off. They sleep off the venom. They can take a bite and keep going until they've killed the cobra. So I like to think of that as an analogy to what we do, whereby the bad guys, the malicious actors, the hackers, are the cobras, and we are the mongoose by name and nature, and we do whatever we can to defang that snake, to cut its head off, and we do that by penetration testing, a term that not a lot of people are aware of if they don't work in cyber. But essentially what we want to do, and we'll get into that, what we do at Mongoose is we seek to make penetration testing available to businesses of all sizes, not just the big players, and we're trying to stop it being elitist. We want it to be accessible. So that's what we do at Mongoose.
So as you said, and I think you're definitely going to win a prize for the best origin story, I think, in terms of the name of the firm. That's going to be hard to top, I think, Alistair. But you've already mentioned that phrase, penetration testing, and I guess we do need to kind of unbundle and explain that, and also perhaps say whether there are any kind of synonyms for it. So please let us know, what do we mean by penetration testing, and indeed do people use other terms for it as well?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. Thank you. I'm glad you asked. Sorry, I do sometimes forget that not everyone knows what we know. So that's a really good question. So penetration testing is also known as ethical hacking. That's, I suppose, a more easy to understand and slightly less rude sounding version of penetration testing and what it is. Within cybersecurity, there are many different disciplines, but our absolute focus is penetration testing, and that is, I suppose, what you'd call the pointy end of cybersecurity. So it's also known as offensive cybersecurity, and so that entails basically a hacking of a client's business, but with authorization. So when someone orders a pen test, we come and we hack your business. And in doing so, we like to simulate real-world attacks. So what do I mean by that? So who would the attackers be that are trying to get into a client system? There are loads of different types and categories, and some of the threat intelligence guys within cyber love to put them in these special categories. But I suppose if I distill it, there are opportunists, there are also board enthusiasts, which might be your teenager in a bedroom that is pretty good on a computer and wants to have a go and see as if they can. Moving on from there, we have cyber criminals who are causing a lot of havoc at the moment. They reside all over the world and often are unchecked in the countries that they reside in, if that makes sense. And then we have, I suppose, the top of the tree, which would be your state-backed hackers. These are nation-state actors with unlimited funds, unlimited resources, and their motivations often differ from a few of the others. And then I suppose another common but often overlooked type of malicious attacker would be a disgruntled employee. So those are the type of people, the type of groups that we seek to emulate when we do a penetration test. So we'll act like one of those groups and we'll hack accordingly. So like anything in tech, the methods and systems are being changed all the time, every day. So we use the most current methods and the most current tools to ethically hack a client system. But then there's a so what part to that. So what, you got into the system, great, well done, you're so clever. So the actual, I suppose, meat of it is we aim to find the vulnerabilities before the hackers do, provide remediation advice to the end client, and then work with the business or client to fix the issue before they can be exploited by the bad guys. And pen testing, penetration testing, ethical hacking, however you want to call it, is really the only true way, really to discover the vulnerabilities of your systems, networks, people. And it's the best way to just face the cold hard facts and then actively do something about them and patch them. So I suppose that's a rather long explanation of what pen testing is, and that's why it's important. Yeah.
Indeed. And thinking about, as I described in my introduction, the kind of depth and breadth of what the profession does across the built and natural environment, I'm thinking that there's clearly a number of areas where the surveying profession should be using this, because not only are they looking at their own internal systems and their own kind of digital estate, but if we think, for example, around things like building management, increasingly, I'm sure you're more aware of I have the concept of this Internet of Things. There are so many devices now connected to the internet. What are your thoughts for our profession around the benefits of this kind of penetration testing approach?
Yeah. Oh wow. So all those sort of disciplines you listed in your intro, Andrew, that RICS members conduct. I mean, I can't even remember what all of them were. I suppose, but I suppose penetration testing can benefit the surveying or building industry, as it were, in a whole number of ways. So I suppose surveyors and RICS members have access to like large amounts of data. And some of that will be stored on premises, servers in an office, might be stored on a laptop. Some, I'd imagine nowadays, will be stored in the cloud as well. And so I'd imagine that those that work within that industry and trade, experts like yourself, will almost always have a computer and data involved in your daily workflow. no matter which, like you say, all of those disciplines you listed at the start, they'll all, I'd imagine, at some point in the day, open a laptop or power up a desktop and do something online with data with a computer. So I suppose, Andrew, and to anyone watching this eventually, if you were to stop and imagine how your business or your workday would look if suddenly you go to that computer and you can't access it, either it won't turn on or you can't access your customer data because it's been wiped or it's been maliciously encrypted by a ransomware gang, or it's all gone. How would that impact your day? And also, from a business perspective, think of things like the PR nightmare, the storm that's going to come from that. There's, for the I suppose the end customer, their trust is going to be broken, so you'll have a loss of customer trust. Huge losses of time and revenue to get you back on your feet as well. Don't forget the revenue and expense for that sort of side of things, incident response and all that kind of thing. And when we're dealing with data that's customer data, we're talking things like GDPR. And in the EU, GDPR fines for losing customer data are eye-watering. It's up to, last time I checked, it was up to 4% of annual turnover, or £17.5 million, whichever is the greater number. And I don't think there's anyone watching this or any business in the UK that would be happy to stomach either of those figures. I think even some of the bigger businesses, if you slap them with a £17.5 million bill, it's going to hurt. It's going to negatively impact the business. And so I suppose penetration testing can help to stop any of that nightmare coming to fruition. It has potential, as I sort of mentioned in the earlier question, to stop hackers before they get started. So we can help RICS members and the surveying industry as a whole and the building industry. We can help them make their network and their infrastructure unattractive to hackers. So by doing a pen test and tightening things down afterwards, we're making it too much effort for a malicious actor and hacker to exploit, and we're then going to force them to pick an easier target, which essentially will be someone that has a less secure network than your own. And then I do just want to move on from that, because you mentioned IoT, which is a really interesting topic, isn't it? It's quite hot at the moment, and I know that I don't deal much with commercial buildings like I suppose you do, Andrew, or your colleagues do. But I know that I've looked at residential properties and they've got Cat6 cable pre-installed in the walls, a little Ethernet port, and so I suppose modern buildings, by their very nature, are becoming more and more connected, and they're built, I suppose, almost with smart systems in mind. They're trying to be future-proofed. So when we talk about IoT devices, there are a huge number of devices, aren't there? So there are things that come to mind when we think of IoT. I'm thinking things like cameras, smart locks, and access control, I suppose, if you're like an office or commercial building, sensors, monitors, lighting, your heating and cooling, your HVAC. And I know you can get connected smoke alarms. So those are the type of devices that I suppose we'll find more and more commonly added to these buildings. They're all going to be connected. And I think the last time I checked, the figure does change, but there are roughly 14 billion IoT devices in use around the world. And from our point of view, as pen testers, or I suppose IT nerds, the connected side of these devices, like the things I listed, like your smart bulbs, whatever, the connected side is often a bit of an afterthought, in the sense that it's not the primary function. The primary function of that device is to do its job, be that turn the light on or whatever. But the connected side of it is often done to quite a low budget, and as a result of that, they use things like generic chips, which are then, I suppose, bought and made to fit their role, but they also have often, not always, but often have weak security as a result on these low-cost devices. And the way I suppose cybersecurity or security as a whole would work for a device. So if you think of your software engineer, to keep defenses like working correctly on the things that we're using now, like our laptops, and we're running Windows and Mac OS, for example, the software engineers need to constantly, at that vendor, they constantly need to create patches and update firmware, and adjust code and things like that. And often, I mean, that is expensive to do because software engineers are very expensive, and often it's not worth doing for IoT devices, so that the chip makers don't do it. A factory in whichever country just won't, they're not interested. So it doesn't get done. So these things get forgotten about and unpatched and often unsecure, and they often have things like credentials on them from the factory that are just never changed. Who's ever, I don't know, accessed their smart bulb and changed the default password on it? Probably not a lot of people viewing that. So to sort of pull us back on track, so an IoT device, as innocuous as they may seem, they're probably not going to be the main focus of an attack, but a hacker is still interested in them because they would seek to use that device to gain a foothold into the network. And that's sort of pen test terminology. A foothold means just getting in, and they'll use that foothold from there to pivot further into the network. So not the best example, but like a home printer or an office printer, for example, that's internet connected, not strictly an IoT device, but for example, something like that, we can use that to actually gain credentials. There are ways to use that if you're in the network to listen out and capture credentials as they go between the printer and another client. So things like that can be done. So it's more important than ever to fully penetration test your estate and infrastructure. And then I suppose from a surveying and building point of view, you don't want the end customer of a building project to inherit what is a vulnerable network, because that's not good for anyone involved. It's not good for the builder handing it over, and it's not good for the person inheriting it. So I suppose you mentioned life cycle. So penetration testing can benefit RICS members and businesses by absolutely covering the whole building life cycle. So that's from I don't know the full building life cycle, but I'm going to say from planning to construction to maintenance. I think you mentioned demolition. I'm sure there's some somewhere in there it can, but and as the building changes and new technologies are added, they can also be tested as they're added to ensure they're not compromising that building, which is almost its own network. And penetration testing also, as well as the building and the IoT devices, it can secure RICS members' own networks, own offices, own data, customer data, and just keep everything secure, and keep everything safe. And that is how it,
Now, you mentioned, to go back to one of the things you mentioned about data on the cloud, and a lot of software, as you well know, is now available, software as a service. So effectively, your data and your apps are running in the cloud. And increasingly, a lot of firms obviously are using these kind of solutions. Do you need pen testing, as you call it, when you've effectively kind of delegated that kind of data storage to what, on the face of it, would be a very trustworthy third party, whether it's Amazon or Google or Microsoft? They're big heritage IT firms. Do you still need that kind of pen test approach when you've kind of abdicated, in some sense, that role to a third party?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, Andrew. A fabulous question. I do actually get asked this a lot, and it's essentially a myth that if everything of yours is on the cloud, it's absolutely safe. So the cloud is essentially just renting some space online. It's, to dumb it down, it's someone else's hard drive, but yes, it's well backed up often. I'll use the analogy of a rental property, with a landlord and a tenant. That's probably the easiest way to explain. So if you're a tenant, your landlord isn't responsible for making sure that you lock the door to protect the things inside your home. That's not up to them. So like I heard you mention Microsoft and AWS, Amazon Web Services, massive players, really good services. Microsoft and AWS, for example, they now actively encourage penetration testing. You can find their rules of engagement on their websites, on the cloud-specific websites, and they no longer require prior notice or approval to a pen test going ahead. And Microsoft say, off the top of my head, it's something along the lines of, don't quote me on this, it's something like when you enhance the security of your application, you help make our entire ecosystem more secure. That basically sums up their attitude. So they are all for it. There are some exceptions. There are certain things you can't test. You can't test things like denial of service because it stresses their servers and etc. But they are. The majority of cloud providers are all for it and are very grateful for it to be done so. You mentioned so at the start of that question things like SaaS and bits and pieces. Which is software as a service for those that don't know. So your cloud hosting providers operate what's called a shared responsibility model with their customer, and there is like the more you give them, I suppose, the more responsibility you relinquish to them to a point. Often the less you have to do security wise, but that's not always possible, and it's not always the right solution for every customer. So the more you're in control of, often the more security you are required to undertake yourself. But penetration testing is, a really good way to do your bit and secure your part of the cloud. So yes, you're in the cloud, but yes, still recommended you get a penetration test. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I mean, to get down to the nuts and bolts, I mean, how often should I know there's no such thing as an average sort of customer, but how regularly should you be doing pen testing, and how does it actually work? What's the actual mechanism? What's the process?
So how often should penetration testing be done? At minimum once a year, and the reason for that is because no matter which business you're in, a lot can change in a year, but also the realm that we're talking in, IT, cybersecurity, a ton can change in a year. So what was once super secure and absolutely watertight, well, guess what? There's now been a 0-day vulnerability released, and suddenly people can get in with very little effort. So at minimum once a year, absolutely. Another time penetration testing should be done is when you've added something to your network. I don't mean like a new laptop, for example. I'm talking you've added another server, or maybe spooled up another cloud instance of something. And the sort of reasons for that are sort of self-explanatory, because it's something new. Does it work? Is it secure? Yes, let's pen test it. Another important time to have a penetration test done is when you've applied a big security update or vendor patch. A lot of people don't do this, but it is definitely worth doing if any of that's happened, because essentially it proves two things. If you get a pen test done after that, it proves if the patch is working or not, or if the security update has done its job. It also can pick out systems that may have been missed with the update. Now that might sound mental to some of the people watching this. You think, whoa, we've got a server in the office and there are 10 laptops, great. But some clients, I cannot explain how large some people's network estate and infrastructure is. So it can and easily happen. People can easily miss a patch because there's another server that no one even knew about, and it does happen. And so pen testing can check if the patch is working, and we often find things that people have missed. So that's another great time to have a pen test done. Another one people don't think of is you should definitely get a pen test done if your business is lucky enough to acquire another business, or if you've merged with another business. Many reasons for this. So if you've acquired another business, you definitely don't want to be inheriting a bad network or security issues. So pen test that once all the dust is settled and all the the finance team and all the directors have got the excitement out of the way, and you've all got your new business cards or whatever. Get a pen test done once you've acquired another business or merged with a business. Definitely. Also, the chances of both those businesses using exactly the same systems and methods when they've merged or acquired is essentially zero. So what you'll have is the IT team, when the merger or acquisition takes place, will probably just be cobbling things together. No disrespect to them, but to make things work, to make these servers suddenly have to speak to the other company servers, they'll be just doing whatever they can, because the accounting team and the finance director will be like, right, we need go, we need to be up and running, everyone needs to be able to speak to everyone needs to see every system, and everyone needs to see every single shared drive, and they'll just do whatever they can to get it working and to make all these different systems speak. And so that inherently opens up security issues, because things have been possibly forced or misconfigured. So when you've had a merger or acquisition, another great time to have a pen test. So your larger businesses will often have pen testing occurring on a rolling basis. And that's great. It's just because their infrastructure is so large. That's something we can do. But your 4 times, I'd say once a year, when something's added to your network, when you've applied an update or security patch, and when you've done an acquisition or merger, those are definitely the 4 times I'd say a pen test should be done. Yeah.
And how does it actually work? I mean, I presume you don't need to necessarily go on site. The whole point is that you can do this from your office, presumably. Once you need to be given some kind of sense of the attack surfaces, to use the jargon that a firm has. But how would it work with a firm that said, right, come and pen test us?
Yeah, and another one people often say, they go, what does it look like? What does hacking look like? I think actually I think it was one of the Matrix films, they actually do use a legitimate pen testing tool on one of the close-ups where they look at one of the computer screens. I think they use something called Nmap. So that is a slight snippet, but I suppose there are 5 commonly accepted stages or phases, as it were, to ethical hacking and pen testing, and they actually apply to the bad guys as well. So I mean, I'll go through them. So the first stage is reconnaissance. This is a super important one. So like hacker reconnaissance 101, what are hackers and pen testers? What are they looking for? What are we looking for? Nothing that exciting, really. It starts with something called OSINT, and that stands for Open Source Intelligence. And so we conduct something called OSINT collection. And that is basically, what can we find publicly? And we're looking for things like usernames, passwords that may have been breached, valid email addresses. And we, depending on the engagement, we'll look at things like LinkedIn and social media. You'd always be really surprised just how much can be found using open source intelligence. There are actually some people on that run YouTube channels that will say, hey, what can we find from this small bit of information, and they'll do a video and show with open source just what you can find, who's who, or where this picture was taken. And the reason we're looking for things like those things I mentioned are we want valid email addresses if we have somewhere to use them. We need to know valid usernames. Again, passwords that have been breached, they might have been changed, but because often, hopefully they have been. but you can still get information from that. And we're looking at the minutiae, I suppose, as it were. So if we have a collection of breached passwords from a business, a client, and they have been changed, well, that's cool. We can still tell things like, at that time, what was the password length? What were the rules required for that password? Did they have to have a special character? Oh, but none of these have got special characters. Okay, so then we can narrow things down and sort of make our time more effective. As well as looking at, I suppose, people, we're looking at things like domains, subdomains. What other infrastructure is out there that this client might have that we're interested in? Is there an easier way to get in than knocking straight on the front door, essentially? Because chances are this door that's down the road that's been forgotten about is probably a whole lot easier to get in, to use an analogy. And we're interested in things like the footprint of systems and devices. So we want to know what they're running, essentially, what versions, what software types are in use. And there are some quite funny ways of doing that, really. If you come back to, say, LinkedIn, like the LinkedIn job section or the Indeed job site, if a client is advertising for a technical job, say software engineer or developer, and they say that developer must be fluent with X, Y, Z, software or system, then you're like, okay, well, that's straight away we're going to find that somewhere at some point, depending how far in we get. So people give quite a lot away just through the internet. So that's stage one. That's reconnaissance, and we're trying to collate as much as we can. And then with that information, we'll do a bit of scanning as a second stage, scanning. And we use tools for this. Often that one mentioned on the Matrix. So people are going to watch that now, aren't they, and see. And a few other tools. There's quite a few, so I'm not going to list them all, there's loads. And people have different ways of doing things. But what we're hoping to find from that scan is we're looking for things like open ports, and we're doing things like inspecting web pages. And what we're trying to see, again, is what services and applications are running behind them. Are there any things that we know are vulnerable? Is there something, low-hanging fruit that's easy and obvious to get in with? So that's the second stage. We've done reconnaissance, we've done scanning, and with the information we've got from the scan, we're going to try to go for stage 3, which is the exciting phase. This is gaining access or exploitation, whatever you want to call it. So exploiting something to gain access to the system behind it. And again, it might be a vulnerable service or application, and we'll often look for things like, a port, web application, or a Wi-Fi network, perhaps, if that's in scope for the test, because we do Wi-Fi penetration testing as well, or even getting a person to do something on our behalf, on the pen tester's behalf, to gain access. So people don't really get that, and so certain engagements, social engineering is in scope, and social engineering is essentially, can I send something to someone's email, ring them up and get them to click it, and then that, say, talks back to my machine? Can I ring up the office in Newcastle, say I'm the IT guy from the London office, give the name of someone that I found on LinkedIn that's a legitimate person that they might know, send, hey, I'm going to send you an email with this in it. Can you please click it just to test something works? If it's done well, they might, and you know what? That's a whole lot easier. It's a really easy way to gain access than doing some of the other methods. So that is another way that it can be done. So reconnaissance, scanning, exploitation / gaining access, and the fourth step is maintaining access, or persistence is another sort of industry term for it. So after we've gone to all the lengths and done the hard work of getting in, we don't want to lose access to those systems when, I don't know, someone reboots, or some cache clears or whatever, or it's the end of the day, whatever. We don't want to lose access. We want to maintain persistence in that system so that when we come back we can still get back in. So there are loads of different ways to install persistence. You know, that could be a whole nother meeting for us. But it could be something as simple as creating a user account, for example, with credentials of our choice, so that we can just log straight back in at a later time. Or it might be something a little more exciting, like dropping a malicious payload onto the network that, you know, executes after a certain amount of time and will call back to our machine to give us remote access, that kind of thing. But just so that when we've, you know, done for the working day and the next day comes, we can get straight back in and continue with the test. So that's the fourth point, maintaining access. And the fifth stage of pen testing is, I suppose, technically it's covering tracks. Now, that's not applicable to what we do as pen testers. That's more for the, you know, the bad guys. But there is still a fifth stage, and I call it reporting and remediation. You know, and basically that is all the things we've done, all the evidence we've gathered, all of our findings. It's putting into a nice, neat report and making it client readable. We don't want to put it into insane hacker jargon because no one understands it apart from us, and, you know, and making giving actionable remediation advice. Well, there is actually some similarity between the fifth stage with pen testers and I suppose black hat hackers, as they were called, and that would be there is a cleanup phase, no matter who you are. So whilst a malicious actor will seek to clean up for different reasons, you know, maybe they don't want attribution, maybe the nation state doesn't want it to come back to, you know, someone that speaks Cyrillic, I won't say where, you know, but we still have a cleanup phase as pen testers, and that is ensuring that your client system is exactly as we left it when we finished. We'll delete any software payloads, get rid of any artifacts, you know, and just make sure that it's as good as before we started. So yeah, those are your 5 stages. There's your reconnaissance, your scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, and covering tracks / reporting and cleaning up. That's very roughly how it would look to an outsider. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this has been fascinating. I guess in conclusion, and I suppose I always like to emphasise that many of our you know, our member firms and members are working in SMEs and smaller firms. I mean, I guess is this technology accessible from a kind of price perspective for smaller firms? And I guess once again, in conclusion, if it is hopefully accessible, what are the top things that businesses of any size should be doing now with this kind of approach and other things in the cyber world?
Yeah, excellent question. So I suppose what does a pen test cost, I suppose, is what it boils down to. And I will always start with saying a penetration test is always cheaper than being hacked. There's no two ways around that. and you know, it scales depending what size your business is, but no matter what, it's always cheaper than being hacked. That's the number one point, absolutely. So Hiscox, the massive insurance firm, they do a great thing, and it's called the Cyber Readiness Report, and it's an annual publication. A real lovely PDF with loads of diagrams from their point of view, and they give really good stats and facts. So the 2022 report, which I read quite a lot, that stated that the average cost of a UK business being hacked was $28,000, which is about £23,000 sterling. So that's the average cost that a business can expect from being hacked. And they said something along the lines of companies with a revenue of $100,000 to $500,000, which is like 81 grand to 407,000, can expect as many cyber attacks as those earning £1 to £9 million or dollars annually, and that trend's increasing. So that's what they noticed happening between 21 and 22. So whereby your smaller firms and your SMEs might have been overlooked back in the day, they're not anymore. If anything, they're probably an easier target because they don't have a huge dedicated cybersecurity team and these expensive systems from these very expensive vendors. So, but to get back to the nitty gritty, which I suppose I've kept the owner managers clinging on here, and it starts at a few £1,000s. A pen test starts at a few £1,000s and goes from there. All your consultations are free with ours. That's how we do things, and I'm always happy to answer questions to anyone. Just fire an email or a phone call over. Always happy to talk. I love what I do. We love what we do at Mongoose, and for the smaller guys, we also have a small business pen test package, which is a fixed price. And, you know, we created that because pen testing can be scary and off-putting, and it's a fixed price, and it was put together because we believe actually it'll probably cover the majority of a small businesses needs, you know, rather than these crazy things that, you know, some people come up with. And I suppose irrespective of who your pen test provider may be, make sure they scope correctly. So at Mongoose, we always scope really, like if we're absolutely down to the, you know, the minutiae when we scope. We do it really effectively. We overkill it, and the reason we do that is, and just to go back on, like you know, our scoping document is huge, but we always go through it with clients to help them through. The reason we scope it so aggressively is to make sure, to protect both sides. It's so that the client isn't getting anything tested that they don't need to get tested, and it's so that, you know, the guys at Mongoose aren't, you know, just doing things they don't need to be doing. It makes the most effective use of time and resources for all parties involved. So like good scoping, no matter who your provider is, good scoping will get you good value. And what do I mean by scoping? So if you know, if you just have, I don't know, a blog, for example, I'm just making this up. If you just have a website that resolves to a blog, there's probably not a need for an external, an internal, a physical, a Wi-Fi, a web app, you know, all these bits. You don't need that kind of pen test. But if on the other hand, you know, you have lots and lots of infrastructure, then you might need those things. So yeah, you know, it scales with whatever your infrastructure size is usually, and we find ways to just make it the most effective. And then pen testing is, I'm going to say this, aren't I? But penetration testing, especially with Mongoose, is money well spent, and I'll tell you why. Because, especially for the, you know, the SMEs and the owner managers, it gives you peace of mind. And I suppose there are quite a few ways it does that. So, number one, it will keep you and your staff employed. That sounds really dramatic, doesn't it? But back to that Hiscox cyber readiness report. I don't know whether it was this year's or another year, but I think it was a 2022 one. I think it's a fifth of SMEs go bust after being hacked, which is a huge amount. And you know, if you go under, no one's getting paid. You have to lay staff off, and your absolute gem. Because I love my business, I know other people love theirs. You're going to lose that. You know, you're potentially going to lose that, and that would really hurt. It would hurt a lot of people, not just the business itself. Penetration testing is also money well spent because it has potential to save you money immediately on the spot, which sounds dramatic again. So yeah, so I'll tell you how. So what we're doing at Mongoose is we're actually working on an insurance product with an insurance partner of ours, and with their underwriters, we're actually seeking to reduce cyber premiums if you can prove you've had a pen test done to our standard. So straight away, because I can tell you now, cyber premiums are going absolutely through the roof. And the CEO of Zurich himself said, I think it was quoted in the Financial Times, cyber risk is becoming uninsurable. So working on a product whereby we can have a pen test done and the premium will drop. So that's how it can save you money and give you peace of mind on the spot. And did you sort of mention things I can recommend or things that businesses can do to protect?
Other things, I suppose what leapt into my mind was probably asking your suppliers whether they've been pen tested as well, because so often people now are part of a bigger kind of digital infrastructure, aren't they? So as well as doing pen testing, it would seem like an important thing now to talk about, you know, the people that you may be linked into who you probably want to make sure they're doing the same thing. So
yeah, you know, due diligence and risk management on the supply chain, again, it is another big thing. You know, and yeah, once again, it's almost like inheriting a bad business, isn't it? You know, making sure that the people you deal with as well are well pen tested, because often they are other businesses will get access to different parts of your systems and things. It is definitely important. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, it's been fascinating, and you certainly win the prize for the best origin story, I think, Alistair, in terms of company name. But no, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I think very timely, given, as you say, that the increasing sensitivity around hacking and say Internet of Things, and the fact, as you say, that from an insurance perspective, we've got to be thinking in the same way that people historically would have thought about physical protection to their business premises. We have to be thinking in a very similar way with our digital estate. But for now, been great to talk. Thanks ever so much for your time, and look forward to chatting again in the future, Alistair.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Fabulous, thank you.